This is Steve McNallen of the Asatru Folk Assembly, bringing you the latest on the revival of the ancient faith of Northern Europe and the awakening of the European-descended peoples everywhere. The gods and goddesses never went away. They are with us always, and now they stir, and we reclaim our ancestral birthright. A glorious dawn awaits. Hail our awakening! Hail Asatru rising! The ongoing spread of indigenous Germanic religion is nowhere seen more clearly than in the local gatherings being sponsored by the AFA and other groups from coast to coast. Sheila and I just got back from Jambermoot, sponsored by Bert, an AFA member in Oregon, as a gathering open to anyone interested. Our own folk builders, Kat and Mike Burke, helped organize it, and we mobilized AFA members in the area to help support the event. Thorgren and Katie went up with us, so the newcomers there got a good picture not only of Asatru, but also of the AFA. It was a great event. At the same time Sheila and I were in Oregon, AFA folk builders Johnny and Julie of Tennessee and Dennis from Ohio hosted a meet-up in Newport, Kentucky. AFA members from all across the area showed up to share food and conversation. A few days earlier, Asatruer from eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey, including AFA members, met in an open event to honor the gods and goddesses near Pipersville, Pennsylvania. This coming weekend, the Northern California Asatru Meetup gathers in Sacramento, California, and while it is not just for AFAers, the AFA does have a strong presence there, and you can usually find Sheila or myself attending. You can find out more about it on www.meetup.com. Come on by. We'd love to see you. Certainly, people can practice Asatru all by themselves if they wish, but the fulfillment of our faith lies in meeting with others who follow our way. The Internet is valuable mainly as a tool for helping people find us so that we can bring them into the AFA community. Here's an email from someone we successfully reached. Matt wrote, telling us why he joined the Asatru Folk Assembly. For me, it is quite simple. My ancestors spent hundreds and possibly thousands or tens of thousands of years evolving in Europe, compared to the century or so since my great-grandfather came to the U.S. from the Lake District of England. There is no question for me. I am a European who happened to be born in this land and country. My heart and soul, quite literally, are European. You're right, Matt. No matter where in the world we live, all of us, Europeans and Africans, Asians, every branch of the human race, are overwhelmingly the product of our respective ancestral homelands. Johann Schuck came to America from Germany in 1754, and Patrick McAnallen left Ireland in 1788. I am descended from both of them. My family has been on this continent for about 250 years, which is pretty old by American standards. Nevertheless, my ancestors were born, lived, and died in Europe for more than 100 times that span. Their bones lie at the foot of the retreating glaciers of the last ice age. They chipped stone into axes and hunted beasts now extinct. Their eldest languages are lost to history. When the very words Ireland and Germany would not be uttered for 10,000 years, your bloodline and mine were already ancient. We are Europe. The bodies of our ancestors will be a part of the European soil until, in some distant age, the dying sun explodes and the earth itself becomes a blackened cinder, drifting in the void. All of which leads me to our topic tonight, Celts and Germans. Many of us, even if we are entirely European in our heritage, are a mix of several nationalities. For example, I have German, Irish, English, and Scottish roots. My family name, however, is Irish. Just how non-Germanic am I? Here is an article I wrote some years back that relates to that question. The chieftain towered over his seated warriors in the smoky hall. Clatter and chatter faded, and all eyes turned to this mustachioed, muscular figure who was their leader. Raising the mead-filled horn high over the throng, he toasted the high god, the one who carries the spear and has ravens hovering about his shoulders. All shouted their approval, and another warrior rose to his feet, lofting his drinking horn and praising the name of the Thunderer. The others echoed him, and in the warmth of their camaraderie, they might well have been in the great hall where warriors go when they die, served by the maidens of battle from the meat of the ever-reborn swine. A scene from Viking history? An evening in a typical Germanic mead hall? No. The word picture painted here is of a feast among their cousins, the Celts. The mythic and historical background just given applies to both these peoples. Like most of us, it wasn't news to me that the two main tribal groupings of ancient Europe had a lot in common. Both are part of the greater Indo-European family. Their mythology shares a common structure, the material aspects of their culture are much alike, and the general heroic worldview unites both Celt and German. But this, as it turns out, is only the beginning. The distinction we make today between these two branches of our kin arise in no small measure from the observations of Julius Caesar. Essentially, he declared the tribes on one side of the Rhine to be the Germans and those on the other to be Celts. In actuality, of course, it was not that simple. Scholars now think that some groups we once labeled German were really Celtic. Other tribes might have belonged to either classification because we don't know what language they spoke. The clear implication is that the physical artifacts they left behind were indistinguishable, and that language is the only definite marker between the two. Physical appearance is no clue, because the Roman commentators describe the Germanic peoples and the Celts in exactly the same terms. Both were tall, tending toward the blonde, and lightly skinned. The word Teuton, by the way, is cognate with the Gaelic tuath, meaning people or tribe, which certainly points to a fundamental kinship. For me, the clincher came when I read Hilda Davidson's book, Myth and Symbols in Pagan Europe, published by Syracuse University Press in 1988. Significantly, it's subtitled Early Scandinavian and Celtic Religions. Page after page and chapter after chapter, she documents the similarities between the mythology, folklore, and ritual of the Germanic and Celtic peoples. I began making a list as I read, and it wasn't long before I had a couple of sheets covered with scribbled notes. I won't get bogged down in the minutiae of these, but some comparisons beg to be made. To make the bulk of this material more easily accessible, I've lumped my comments into some broad categories. First of all, gods and goddesses. The Celtic Lu and our own Odin are much the same. Odin is father of the gods, keeper of two ravens, carries a magic spear, and has one eye. Lu is first in the Celtic family of gods, is linked with ravens, carries the spear of victory, and closes one eye when he performs fantastic deeds on the battlefield. The Nordic Thor, whose name means thunderer, prizes his mighty hammer. He rides about the heavens, laughing in his red beard, in a wagon pulled by supernatural goats. Tyrannus of the Celts, whose name also means thunderer, drives a chariot behind sacred bulls. He wields the thunderbolt, whose name in Old Gaelic tongue derives from the same Indo-European root as the name of Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. Tyrannus, too, is pictured as having a flowing red mane. Tyr, as our tales tell, lost his hand binding Fenris the wolf. He used to be the sky god, scholars say, until Odin took his place. The Celtic Nuada lost his arm in battle against the Fomorians, and so Lu, the Celtic equivalent of Odin, became leader of the gods. In the domain of fertility and plenty, our own Frey rules supreme among Asa folk. One of his favorite beasts is the horse, which just happens to also be sacred to Doida, the good god, who is Frey's Celtic equivalent. How about other characters described in our folklore? Giants, The Celtics have them, just as Asa folk do. They're called the Fomorians, and the Celtic gods battle mightily against them. Moreover, the role they play is pretty much the same, representing the forces of inertia and entropy in the cosmos. Valkyries find their reflection in the Morrigan, fierce goddesses of the battlefield who grant victory, spin the fates of war, and serve the heroes in the afterlife. This twin aspect, fiends of blood and death on the one hand, enticing lovers on the other, is found in both cultures. Similarly, both Celtic and Germanic sagas tell of supernatural women warriors who instruct and initiate the chosen heroes. Brynhild teaches Sigurd hidden magical lore. The female chieftain Skathach, or Shadow, takes the Irish Cuchulainn under her care and makes him the warrior he is destined to become. Sigurd and Cuchulainn are descended from Odin and Lu, respectively. Consider the so-called lesser beings, the ones that seldom figure in myth and poetry, but who make the life of the common man and woman more bearable. The land spirits, for example, are alike in both cultures. Elf lore and the connection of these wights to the ancestors was recognizably the same to the ancient Teuton and to his or her Celtic contemporaries. How about religious lore and practices? I referred to almost identical warrior paradises in the scene which opened this article, but the overlap between Celtic and Germanic lore goes far beyond this. Bogs throughout northern Europe received sacrifices from Celt and German alike. Weapons and armor captured in battle, food and beakers, miscellaneous items, all were deposited in lakes and marshes in the same way, to the point that we can't even tell which finds are German and which are Celtic. When the Druids sacrificed to the gods in the old days, the blood from an animal was sprinkled with a sprig of greenery on the assembled people, so the divine energy inherent in the blood could be directly transferred to them. In historical Ausatru, our forebears did exactly the same thing in the course of a sacrifice, or blot. Today, of course, modern practitioners of both religions use mead or other fermented fluid in this role. Across the length and breadth of our European homeland, our ancestors honored the gods in the open air because we thought it inappropriate to shut them up into limiting, lessening structures like the Christian churches. Similarly, in the earliest days, our representations of the gods and goddesses were simple indeed, often carved from pieces of wood to which nature had already given the basic shape, awaiting only a few refinements from human hands. These customs accurately describe Celts as well as Germans. Tribesmen of both groups used intoxicating drink in religious ritual. Often this was mead, but it could be ale as well. And while we're considering altered states of consciousness, let's remember the battle frenzy of the Odin-gripped warriors, the berserkers. In old Ireland, the same warrior's madness was called the Farag. Readers of the Norse stories will remember how Sigurd the Volsung killed the dragon Fafnir and roasted its heart. When he burned his finger, he stuck it in his mouth and found that he could understand the speech of birds. The Irish hero Fergus gained the same ability to understand bird talk when he singed his finger while cooking a salmon over a fire. How about the overall map of the universe in their respective cultures? When we look at the cosmology of both the Teutons and that of the Celts, we can't help but see the likeness. Both have a giant tree, the center of the cosmos, and indeed the framework in which all the worlds are found. To Asa folk, it's Yggdrasil. The Celts called it Bile. The other key component of the universe in ancient Germania was the Well of Weird, containing the deeds that make up the past. Drinking from its waters gives wisdom, and Odin gave up one of his eyes for the privilege. As it turns out, the Celts have an almost identical well. Hazelnuts fall into it, where they are eaten by the salmon of wisdom. In conclusion, a Viking of the 10th century would likely have felt comfortable in a Celtic ritual among the Gauls 1,000 years earlier. Celtic religion deviates from the so-called Asatru norm no more than do, for example, a priestess of Freya in Iceland and a warrior pledged to Wotan in Germany 1,000 years earlier. Indeed, one is inclined to say that there is only European religion and that the Germanic and the Celtic beliefs are two expressions of it. So what are the implications of all this? Well, it means that the Irishman need not feel out of place calling on gods which are more often associated with Norway's fjords than the Emerald Isles, hills, and valleys. Ultimately, all of us North folk are kin. As geneticist Brian Sykes has pointed out, between 85 and 90% of the European genome is still derived from those hunter-gatherers who migrated north with the receding glaciers. The Celts, Germans, and the Slavs all split off from the funnel beaker people only about 5,500 years ago, a short time, relatively speaking. We are genetic kin as well as spiritual kin. Celtic-Germanic unity flies in the face of the sometimes heard assertions that since Europeans often boast roots in different countries, we're somehow of mixed ancestry. How often have you heard someone say, "I'm a Heinz 57 blend, part Irish, part Swedish, with some English and some German thrown in"? Clearly, that's not mixed at all, because the northern peoples are essentially one, in both their physical aspects and in their ancient religions. We mustn't let people divide us on the basis of superficialities. The catalog of our similarities means we can use either culture to fill gaps in our knowledge of the other. As we reconstitute the tapestry of our ancient Asatru beliefs, there will be holes where the moths of time and persecution have done their work. But if we know the common pattern and how it's woven in the Celtic material, we can patch holes in the Germanic culture with greater confidence. The bottom line is this. Despite our many distinct cultural features, as well as our unique historical journeys of recent centuries, the diverse peoples of Europe remain, in many respects, one. This is especially true of the Germans and the Celts. By all means, don't feel guilty about drinking your Guinness from a Viking drinking horn, or honoring your Celtic ancestors using Norse forms. Whether you're Danish or Dutch, German or English, Scottish or Swedish, the Asatru revival has a place for you. You may be eclectic Northern European, but that doesn't make you a so-called mutt. Your noble ancestors deserve a better description than that. If you are ready to find your way home to the spiritual path of our forebears, the Asatru Folk Assembly invites you to join our community. Please visit our website at www.runestone.org, read our Declaration of Purpose, and if what you see there speaks to your soul, we're ready when you are. Together, let us write the next chapter in the history of the sons and daughters of Europe. Only when we realize we are a river will we stop drowning in puddles. This is Steve McNallen of the Asatru Folk Assembly, www.runestone.org. I'll be back next week.